Dun, dun. Dun, 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 That's the night court theme. A night court theme. Very good show. My favorite was the prank war episode with the other judge. It was all over Harry Stone's judge's robe, which apparently was the creme de la creme of judge's robes, at least in night court. Dun, 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 dun. All right. I was talking to myself, Forbes. I was conducting an interview with myself.
Oh, that's good. It's always good to talk to yourself. It's healthy.
I remember on night court, Christine got married to a DEA agent. And the thing they had in common was they both collected Princess Diana, Prince Charles wedding plates, commemorative plates. And then he died in Latin America fighting our regime change wars.
All right. It's kind of, in a twisted way, it actually kind of reminds me of my mother, because my mother actually collected Princess Diana and Charles plates. It actually had figurines of Princess Di and Charles from, I guess, when they were married, like 81 or something like that.
I forget.
Yeah, my mother, my mother was Irish Protestant, and I think there was always some kind of like weird, kind of like royal respect unionism kind of going on, which will lead into our topic of the day.
Independence.
Union, not union. Independence. Yes. Look how I judo flipped that.
Look at that. But, Brandon isn't here yet, so it's all for nothing. It's all for nothing. He'll be here soon.
He better be. Do you think he's
avoiding
us because he owes you money?
What?
Do you think he's avoiding us because he owes you money?
Probably. Yeah. I learned another interesting fact today. Do you remember the show Head of the Class?
Head of the Class.
It was all smart high school kids in the Bronx with the wacky teacher. Robin Givens was in it.
I think I know the name. No, I don't know that one at all. I mean, it sounds like kind of like, was it supposed to be kind of like a clone of like Welcome Back, Kotter kind of?
Yeah, but they were all smart kids.
Okay.
One of the guys in it became a famous producer, and then he was like a pervert. Like he was like all into people's feet. Like he produced like Nickelodeon shows, like prolific.
Well, okay, now you steered the conversation back to something I do know. I know what you're talking about. There's a whole thing where like the guy who like ran Nickelodeon was obsessed with feet and like underage feet, and like you could, there's like screenshot after screenshot of like how they focus on like young women's feet. Actually, not women, young girls' feet.
All right, I think Brandon should be arriving any second. I just admitted him with the click button. We still don't see his mug.
Well, again, maybe he's going to pay up his $20 to you.
Yeah. Everybody owes me. Everybody owes me. Oh, there he is. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, Bill is saying you owe him about 2% a day on that $20. You going to pay up or what?
What am I owing $20 for this time?
Oh, look at this. It's already starting, Bill. He's playing dumb. I had no idea. No, sure.
Someone bet on the Generals to beat the Globetrotters. I won't say who.
Yeah, but again,
Brandon, so I got our first complaint of the show.
Oh, good.
My wife says that way too much Forbes and I, and not enough Brandon. So I wanted to do a segment, Brandon, just for you, just an off-topic, not very politically important. What is your favorite all-time Cascadian sports moment?
Ooh. That's enough, Brandon. Anyway, back to me and Bill.
Shut up, Forbes. Watch it.
I think, I would definitely talk about either sending a Cascadia team to London for the 2018 Canifa World Cup. I think is a great example. And then, honestly, I really love the soccer competitions between the Sounders, the Timbers, and the Whitecaps, because they compete for the Cascadia Cup. And so it's almost like an informal rivalry between these three MLS teams. And at each of the games, like the Sounders will hold up a Cascadia flag kind of at the beginning with the pyrotechnics, or the Timber Army will drop these huge, massive, Cascadian Tifo displays involving thousands of people. And so I certainly think any of the games, it has less to do for me about the sports and more to do with seeing these awesome displays that really celebrate the Cascadian identity or Cascadian movement.
It's pretty cool.
See, I was going to go with, I'm trying to remember, was it the Bellevue, Washington Little League team that defeated like the Taiwan team, I think like in the 70s or 80s? That was like it was a huge story. They were, so for those who don't know like Little League history, like back in the 70s and 80s, and I think maybe even before that, and even part of the 90s, like Chinese Taipei won every year. Lots of scandals, like controversy, like they would, take the best, million kids and find the best 10 of them to make a team or whatever.
Was it kind of like Eastern Bloc kind of things? Was like, where are you doping these kids, or you cut like these weird
age? Little League has got more scandals in it than any sport. It's fascinating. You have like districting, zoning, like age scandals. There's all sorts of like. Anytime there's a feel-good Little League team, like my first instinct is, oh, they're cheating, because chances are there. But there was a Bellevue, Washington team.
I think I remember once, I think it was a Cuban team, and like the pitcher's like 25.
Actually, that was New York, and that was a kid named Danny Almonte.
Okay, who
ended up marrying a teacher, like one of his teachers. But Brandon, do you know anything about the Bellevue, Washington? Am I correct in that?
Only from Google, which says 1982. And that was a big deal. And so there's a YouTube video if you'd like to learn more.
30 for 30, ESPN did a special on it too. But
gotcha.
that would be.
I was very lucky. I mean, so when I grew up, I grew up in the Seattle where we had the Kingdome, Ken Griffey Mariners, and then I also grew up with the Sonics of, Seattle actually had a basketball team. So Gary Payton, Detlef Schrempf, Sean Kemp. Yeah.
And
who, by the way, just helped start, I think, the first Black-owned marijuana store in Seattle.
That's very cool. And I was going to say also Ichiro fever hit Seattle. That was very
sure
cross-cultural, and that was a fun time to be a baseball fan. Like just Japanese baseball. Like America opened up in that moment to like global baseball, not just American baseball. Like they recognized
Well, Ichiro is like a folk hero in Japan. Like that's no joke. I mean, like again, my wife knew his name, and my wife doesn't watch any baseball whatsoever. So again, like him like making it big in like the league. Again, like Japanese baseball fans were just ecstatic about him. They thought it was great. And Japanese baseball is very unique too. It's kind of like it's a sport where there's a real intense rivalries that we don't understand in the United States, and like, but at the same time too, they appreciate when one of their star players goes to America. It feels like again like he's graduated and everyone's happy.
I've always wanted to go to a baseball game in Japan.
Oh, you need to. I mean, like I did the one game, Tokyo Giants versus the Hanshin Tigers, right, which is the equivalent of the Yankees versus the Red Sox. It's like that intense kind of rivalry. And it was in the Giants Stadium, and like it was amazing. I mean, like it was something where again, like people are chanting, people are like yelling, people were just intensely into the game, and the food was fantastic. You had such a plethora of like items to choose from, and they had these, no other way to put it, like they had these very attractive 21-year-old girls running up and down with like kegs on their back, so that you never had to wait for a beer or anything like that. And one of the other funny things, too, was that some of the girls actually had Johnny Walker Black pre-mixed with club soda. So they would actually show up. And it's like they're serving hard alcohol at a stadium, which is a big, that's a huge faux pas in the United States. You will never see that at any stadium because, Americans will drink like idiots, I guess, And that was a big part of that. Again, like, you see these girls, like, again, they're just going up and down the steps, and, like, they'll serve $8 a drink. And, again, they're strong pours. And it's just, like, you're kind of getting blasted, eating great food, and, like, watching the almost, like, tribal chants between the two opposing teams. It's a very special moment, and something that sticks in my mind a lot.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of California events that I haven't been to any, like I've been to one boxing fight in I saw one Patriots game in Oakland. I probably should go see a Giants Dodgers game. Seems like an important thing to do.
Yeah, like, and I live in like Southern California. I'm a huge Giants fan. And by the way, by huge, I mean like I just like the stadium. I don't follow baseball too closely at all, and I also like the San Francisco style hats. So that's about it. But yeah, I would like to really go see like one of those kind of games, especially with that kind of rivalry.
Yeah. No, it's did we lose Brandon?
Well, again, you kept texting him about the money thing, and I think oh, okay.
All right. So I figure we should, other than talking about baseball, which would be fun,
Right.
this episode. Oh, before I forget, Brandon, and this might get edited out, but for Cascadia Underground, I might have a potential interesting article for you to write. So in the last episode I did, which was 2 weeks ago, sorry, that man Bill Beardsley talking about communal living. His son is starting a communal village in Orcas Island, Washington, where it's all going to be like local farming, like they're going to farm to feed themselves, and then I think give the rest of their food to homeless people. So
No, you know what the group's called?
I don't, but I can get you that info really quick. That's easy. Yeah, his brother, the guy's brother, was my best man at my wedding, so it's an easy get. But
Oh,
yeah,
that's
he's starting communal living, and
there's a very active community of people on Orcas Island, and they do there's a group of them that do a festival called Imagine Festival, and it's really, really nice. It's on Orcas Island in Doe Bay, which, if you haven't been to it, is a beautiful retreat right on this little inlet. And you can see seals that kind of hang out down there, and the whole island is great. But there's a lot of off-grid living, communal living, alternative structure building, and I think it's a pretty small population. I think it's maybe in the several thousand or something like that. So it's a great place to visit and go.
yeah, that's probably a place we're going to hit up when we do our Pacific Northwest trek. My friend is, I think, 2 weeks away from starting the Pacific Crest Trail, so I might go meet him somewhere in Oregon and Washington and see him, or maybe even pick him up where he goes and then drive to Seattle. I don't know. Haven't figured that out yet.
Well, let me know when you're up here, and let's definitely connect. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely like to have a local show me, especially someone like you who loves Cascadia as much as you do. That's like that's a VIP tour.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm and also too, like Bill, like I want to go up to go see you guys up in Fairfield, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so like that sounds like a lot of fun too. It's again, any vacation experience is always amplified when you have someone who actually knows the area and likes it a lot,
So I have, this will be a transition to our topic, but Brandon, what is a shorter distance, Seattle to Boston or Paris to Moscow?
Let's go with Paris to Moscow.
That is correct. Yet in that distance, there's Germany, Bulgaria, Poland, and Russia. There are 4 countries. There's different languages. Yet in America, we are a giant mass land that has one federal government. So today's show is about independence and why we want independence. And that's just one reason for me. And I think this ties into like what you talk about a lot with the bioregionalism, but just culture in general. Granted, we don't have the different languages as much as Europe. I mean, we obviously have people who speak different languages in America, but there is such a
I'm impressed. No, I think I'm just to cut in. I'm actually very impressed at the diversity of cultures, languages, backgrounds, and ethnicities. In North America, in the United States, I think it's actually pretty incredible. I don't think that if you can really find that anywhere else in the world where you have that same diversity in such a small area and the same kind of mixing of backgrounds. I think that's one thing that really makes our area very unique, and especially California and the West Coast, where we are kind of the gateway between the East and the West.
Yeah, you don't see as much Europeans coming to America anymore to
No,
live. I
yeah,
mean,
it's well, I mean, because America's gotten so behind when it comes to like living standards and like the ability to have like class mobility. Like, if you came over like in the early part of the 20th century, probably all the way up until about probably the 60s, probably like, early 70s, you're doing a lot better here than you were in Europe. But right now, it's just that it's completely the opposite. It's flipped. I mean, like, you don't, maybe, I don't know, again, like, the question of like mobility where like you go from like working class, middle class to upper class. Like I don't know how like strong that is in Europe, but you still have a safety zone. You still have some kind of living standard that is above most Americans, and we're not seeing that happen. We're not seeing like this kind of process where like people are like dying to come from Europe to America anymore. It was the opposite for like decades, and especially in the 20th century, especially with the upheavals of the First and Second World War, the pogroms and like the Holocaust and things like that. Whereas an absolute push force to actually make people want to leave their homeland and actually believe America was a better place. We're not seeing that anymore. Actually, I would see kind of like the opposite, where it seems like there's more Americans going abroad than actually sticking at home.
I was going to say there's an indicator in there that's just as bad is we still get a lot of the foreign students who come to our elite universities, but we can't keep them.
Right.
I mean, India for the longest time, the goal was to get to America if you were from India. And now it's not as much. People are going back to India to start businesses and to make their money there.
Yeah, they'll basically, get their education, and because again, like, they already have like the foundation of education, which is so much stronger than our U.S. system at the moment. So they come in and like they get a degree and they go back to the home country. But in the old days, that wasn't the case. Like I can think about like 4 examples, again, and obviously this is anecdotal, but 4 examples of people who came over in like the 60s and 70s from like third world countries, India, for example, and actually flourished here. But that's not happening anymore. Again, like the idea of the immigrant coming over to America to really flourish, there still is something to do with that idea, but it's mostly from total desperation now, and not really like something where they think they're going to flourish.
I think it's important to realize that's always kind of been the case. I mean, you've always had America has a history that is just different waves of migration, oftentimes coming from very desperate situations. And they've always faced, it's not just about having a better living standard here. I mean, they've almost always faced racism and really and people taking advantage of them. And they've kind of had to work for decades to mesh into society, whether it's Chinese workers in the 1880s and 1860s, or Irish immigrants coming here. And then you had this whole wave of basically going through Western Europeans to Eastern Europeans, and you had the Polish individuals who would move here. They would face discrimination and then integrate in society. And I think now we really see, even after World War II, we see the same types of migration, but really coming from Latin America, coming from different parts of Asia. And it's important to also note that, I certainly here in Cascadia, I think California is the same way, but we have large refugee communities that settled here of Hmong and, Vietnamese refugees that fled from the Vietnam War, people coming from Myanmar, people coming from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all of these different areas, and they are looking for it. But I also agree with what you're talking about, which is that we failed to make this a good place for people to live and a secure place, and really work to attract the specialized kind of like, when you look at the H-1B visas or something like that, one of the biggest things that Trump did was to shut down a lot of the specialized immigration programs, specialized working programs that a lot of tech workers would come here, or people who would come here to study. I think one of the saddest things that I've seen is the amount of people who will come here to study, and when they graduate, literally, within days, there's people knocking at their doors saying, all right, your visa's expired, you've graduated, you need to go home, rather than us welcoming people with open arms. And then, or in addition, not having job opportunities, not being able to give the proper visas so that we get people who are literally incredibly specialized, people who have run factories, people who are research scientists, and they end up working at a 7-Eleven or a gas station because we don't give them the access to actually get a real job with their specialty. And I think those are all things that we really need to address and change.
Yeah, and that's extremely valid points because again, we are not allowing these people to actually really kind of integrate because again, there's really been some backwards reactionary policies in the United States. I mean, we're not really allowing people to flourish as they once did because again, there was, in the old days, I mean, if you showed up, at Ellis Island or whatever, and you just signed your name, and just all of a sudden, you're in America, that's it, done. But we're creating all these hurdles and things like that, and it's gotten worse over the years. It got worse in the Obama years too. I mean, when my wife was getting her green card, my wife is Japanese, and when she's getting her green card, it was around 2004, 2005. And, it was sort of a hassle, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. And then when, I hear about, some other immigrants coming in around, 2008, 2009, 2010, in the Obama years, all of a sudden it's wow, they have to jump through all these hurdles. There's a huge cash thing that they have to put into it. I mean, it was, liberals have this idea that Obama was kind of a savior from in the Bush years. And yeah, in some ways he was, I mean, Bush years were pretty terrible, but there was also some things that were really kind of backwards and very ugly that they won't own up to.
Well, as Obama said in the 1990s, he would have been considered a moderate Republican. That is a quote he said about himself. And that's true. I think that's, there's many reasons to want independence. I think that's a big one. I think that's one of the obvious ones is this country has moved very far to the right.
Yeah, it's just the Democrats have capitulated constantly, and so we're just keep shifting this whole paradigm that the moderate Rockefeller Republican of an Obama thinks is such a super liberal now.
Yeah, and there's just no opposition. I think people really freaked out when Reagan won so handily. The Democratic response after Dukakis was Clinton, who was a very conservative Democrat. I mean, you look through it, who's been the most progressive president or nominee the Democrats have had since Reagan? Mondale, who got absolutely crushed. I mean, who was it after that was not a very conservative Democrat?
Well, I mean, Dukakis was a more traditional Democrat. And people forget, there was that summer where he was up by 20 points. He was, his message was actually getting across the electorate, but the problem is that there was two major things that he screwed up on, or two major things that the media want to focus on. One was at the moment when he got into the tank, and he looked like an idiot. He looked like, again, they said it looked like Snoopy with the helmet for flying around his biplane. Dukakis, it was a bad photo op, but again, that's not the worst thing in the world. And then also too, the entire thing with the what was it?
Willie Horton.
Willie Horton, yeah, and they just pounded that in too. Which again, in the scheme of things, that was a stupid policy. Massachusetts should not have let out people who were, on weekend furloughs who were convicted of murder. So again, there was this bad, Democratic governance. Not so much politics per se, because we can go back and forth about how they came across, and there was a racial dog whistle obviously with that one. But if you just let out murders like that, you might get some blowback on that. So good job, Democrats.
A question for you, Brandon. How much do you think, with both movements, but Bernie Sanders getting screwed over in 2016 and to a lesser extent in 2020, how much do you think that's affected progressives in wanting to break America up? Has that been, I know for the CNP, that was 2016 was our big catalyst year. I don't know what it was like for you guys.
Yeah, I think 2016 was a tremendous catalyst for Bernie Sanders and the progressive movement in general. I think it's a lot. I think that the most powerful thing that you can do is have a vitalized progressive movement, get hundreds of thousands of people excited and involved in politics, and then completely slam the door on them and show them how corrupt the system is. And I do think a lot of that got funneled into supporting other organizations like the DSA, or, you know, starting a whole slurry of new progressive PACs and other organizations. But I certainly think that here in the Northwest and in Cascadia and in California, I think when you already have the alternative there that people can stumble on, it is very powerful. And I think one of the most powerful things about having a party that's willing to actually go out there and talk about independence and talk about removing itself from the United States is it offers a very powerful visioning framework. It creates an alternative framework where our discussions are not now rooted in the failings of the United States. I think that that's the difference of what sets the California National Party, the Cascadia Bioregional Party, really aside, and these movements aside from other movements that are existing, you know, because you do see other great organizations that are progressive based, a People's Party, but none of them, but if they're working within the framework of the United States and they don't have that component that's working out of it, they're falling into a system that is already corrupt. It's already skewed against them. And they don't have the advantage of being able to say, hey, all right, let's erase all that and really get down to what we believe in and the issues that we believe in. And let's start with that. And let's talk about the issues that we believe in first. And then figure out how we're going to do it, rather than already compromising all of our values to try and fit into some rigged system that's already completely, you know, fucked up, basically, you know, that's already denying people human rights, that's already putting people in camps along the border, that's already kind of like taking this really serious shift towards fascism. And so I think 2016 woke a lot of people up, got a lot of people active. I think we're going to be seeing the effects of that for years, because it's not just progressive people going into politics, it's progressive people, it's women becoming lawyers, it's minorities stepping up into leadership positions, it's people demanding truth and transparency in all these different fronts. So I think it was a big effect. I'd be curious about, so for the California National Party, how do you feel like the progressive shift has impacted you in both 2016 and 2020?
Well, Bill, you go first, but I have some opinions on that one.
So a lot of this comes from Theo, who I've talked about this just because he was, you know, he started the party in 2015. I think
Theo Slater, just to be clear. Yes.
Theo Slater, yes. I believe, and I hate to be quoted on this, I believe almost over half of the party came from 2016, Bernie getting screwed over. I think for a lot of people, it was just proof that it's more plausible for California to become independent and then become progressive than for America to become progressive. I think that's really what it came down to. And I think that, you know, and when I say progressive too, I want to include places for like open-minded Republicans or open-minded independents who maybe disagree on a few issues, but share fundamental issues that I think we all have in common. You know, it's easier to work in that, but regardless, yeah, it was, 2016 was big. 2020 was more, I'd have to check with Theo, but we got a lot of recruits from Yang, myself included, Elizabeth Warren supporters, Bernie supporters, and Gabbard supporters. And so it was a little, I mean, because there was more progressives running in the primary. But, you know, to 2016, it was really a lot of Bernie people who, like 2020, I mean, I don't want to say he was cheated, but like the system, when you have corrupt rules in already, it's not cheating because you're just following your corrupt rules, but there's corruption. 2016, he was outright cheated. It was a combined effort from the media, the DNC itself. I mean, just dishonest things said about Bernie Sanders, you know, media coverage. It was, I think it was the institutional corruption that I think drove a lot of people to the California National Party, into the California independence movement. There's a statistic for the Republicans to filibuster, they need the same population of senators, actually less than that of California. So if you take all those Dakotas, Wyomings, Montanas, Alaskas, all those small population red states, they can filibuster anything that California would ever want to do. And they have less of a population. So there's things like that. But I think, yeah, it was really just the Democratic National Party had more to do with California independence movements than I think even Trump winning. Trump winning did bring people over, don't get me wrong. And I think if he had won again, we would have had a huge, influx of people. But, unfortunately, one of the problems we have is people are like, oh, Biden's in, Orange Man bad is gone. So we can stop worrying. Like a lot of people, not the people who joined the California National Party, but a lot of liberal or progressive people in general don't care about politics anymore. They don't care that Biden is doing a terrible job. They're back to being apathetic.
Well, I mean, I think the whole thing with like Biden is that I wouldn't go as far as say like he's doing like a terrible job, but the thing is that he is, Trump has set such a low bar that him looking better. Well, okay, so Bill just left the room. That's cool. That's fine. I was just talking. That's okay. Hey, so Obi-Wan Kenobi, let me tell you about what's going on with Biden. Biden, again, is like, there was such a low bar that him looking semi-competent in any respect was making people think that the American system was working. But again, California is a nation state. It is a larger population than Canada. And we are having only 2 senators, and so we can be busted out of the system completely by, a ragtag band of like red states. Thank you, Bill. Okay, so that's great. Perfect.
I've heard it before, Forbes. I didn't to hear it again. My apologies.
Oh, fine. Anyway, and I was gonna say I'm just complaining about Biden. Biden again is this, I would just say semi-competent, not fully competent, not really actually trying to make things change for the better, maintaining the status quo that existed during the Obama years. Like, yeah, he's doing that. Is that the Obama years better than the Trump years? Yes, but the Trump years were such, hot garbage, and the Obama years was just, missed opportunity after missed opportunity. And I think that's what's frustrating so many people on the progressive movement, where they find out that you really are not making too much change whatsoever. You're basically just, you're choosing between hell and purgatory. And this is constantly going back and forth with that. You're just going to be like, yeah, we're going to back this person so it doesn't get too bad. But there's no real change in living standards. The wages issue is not being addressed. Housing issue is not being addressed. So many things, like there's a laundry list of things that are not being addressed because of Democrats in power. Yes, again, Democrats in power, fantastic. Clap ourselves on the, let's clap for a moment that, we got a nice little, Democrat in there who's not going to try to like openly murder us or openly screw over like poor, migrants. Well, maybe, I guess, I don't know. But anyway, long story short is that we're in a position where we are so overly happy with the bare minimum. And we need to have something better because, again, human life is so important. We have only a short term on this planet, and we cannot be just accepting the bare minimum anymore. And I think that, the country itself, the United States of America, was actually based on trying to get past a poor system, even though that system itself, like Great Britain compared to the rest of Europe, was obviously much better than the continental Europe. But, but a few Americans actually thought that, we should kind of get past that. Now, granted, they were slave owners and aristocrats of themselves, but there was a lot of, relatively for the era, progressive ideas that they pushed forward, and they moved forward with that, and they broke away from the empire, which is more interested in fighting France for the 15th time.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a lot of different ways that you can talk about independence. There's a lot of different reasons for it. I think Cascadia is really interesting because we will never probably have the representation that we want or need as part of the United States or Canada, just because we don't have the population for it, really. I mean, and we shouldn't and we won't. But right now, we have about 16 million people, but a landmass the size of Mongolia and an economy that's in the world's like top 10. And so to have a top 10 economy via GDP and living standard with only 16 million people is incredible. And to have that type of wealth and have the wealth disparity that we have, to have the issues that we have with homelessness and to be facing the issues, I think is criminal. And you see that with the wealth disparity and this ever widening gap in social services. But we should be able to do so much better, and we would be able to do so much better, if we were able to govern for ourselves. And I think, it's not just about human rights, but also as we face climate change, this little time that we have on the planet is ever becoming more important. And the time to just live in the status quo has kind of left. And I think it's, whether it's talking about, and I think 2016 really made that clear for a lot of people. I do think that, while a lot of people might feel complacent, I'm actually personally so happy. And I think a lot of people in the Cascadia movement are so happy to have Biden as president, because I think for the past 4 years, everything that we've done has been framed in fighting fascism, fighting Trump, fighting this wave of whether it's economic or whether livelihood during the pandemic. I think the best movements are born not out of desperation, but when people have the time to really examine, when they have the resources to be supported in their own livelihood. So when people have their own shelter, when people have their own food provided and education, and a single mother with 2 kids, isn't having to constantly scramble between 3 jobs and trying to get their kids to daycare and feed themselves, if that person can be supported, they can engage more politically. And I think that that's the battle that we have to now, kind of take upon ourselves, is that these moments that, feel like a lot of people have gone back to complacency. I'm not actually interested in working with them. I'm interested in finding the 10% of people who right now want to help lay the foundation and framework for really like kind of launching a movement that can really, take root, because the fascism aspect, the pendulum swing, it's going to be back, and the next economic collapse, it's going to be back, and climate change is not leaving. It's only going to get worse. And so this is kind of a nice window that we're in right now, where we can be really like laying the foundation for the next wave of success, because it's completely cyclical. And in 2 years when Republicans sweep the House, or in 4 years when they take the presidency and the filibuster has been done away with, I think that there's going to be a new desperation, and it's going to be really important that we've already been prepared and preparing, for those eventualities. Because I think and just to kind of wrap this all up, the most important thing since 2016 that we've really seen, the biggest reason for Cascadia to exist, even more than climate emergency and all of these other issues where the U.S. government is failing, honestly, is providing a safe space for people. It's providing a safe space for racial minorities. It's providing a safe space for refugees. It's providing and people who have their citizenship at risk. It's providing a safe space for trans and LGBTQ youth and individuals, and saying that, you're people, you're not going to get your passport taken away because of who you are. And as we see that, the wave of anti-voting laws, the wave of anti-trans and LGBTQ laws still sweeping the country right now, that safe space that we can provide is the best argument for why we're really honestly going to remove ourselves from a government which has become very much a fascism. And I think, providing that safe space removing ourselves that are, from governments that are violating human rights of individuals and refusing to do anything on climate change. And it's just the status quo is just going to become more and more of a powerful argument.
That's a very powerful argument you just made. I think that, again, what you summed up is very perfect. When it comes to this kind of situation, we have something where there's so many goals that we have on the general progressive left that we want to achieve. The biggest obstacle is the federal government itself. The federal government is not really working with us. It's also kind of built in that way, for example, we can have 20 senators from different states whose whole population equals half of California, and they can make policy. So again, there's built-in systemic things that we cannot work with anymore. And the fact is that, life is too short to keep going back and trying to compromise with people who are out to lunch politically. And we need to have something where we can have a system where we can focus on more local matters. Actually, I think what it comes down to really, when it comes to the Cascadian movement and the California movement, is that we want to have more local control because we understand what's happening out here. And we don't want to have roadblocks set up by people who, one, probably don't care, and then two, are so far removed from us that, again, we can't keep going back and forth. Secession movements are kind of a funny thing in the United States because, we've had such a mixed bag. The United States forming in the first place was a giant secession movement from the British Empire. And again, I would say that even though there's so many caveats and so many ways we can talk about the slave-owning aristocracy and the white supremacy that came with that, it was at least a leap ahead of what the British were offering. But then, 1860 arrives, we have, again, slave owners once again trying to break away. And, there's a feeling in the United States that, secession could lead to some kind of violence or some kind of, altercation. But really, this is not a movement, California's movement is not about trying to have a violent altercation. The movement's about trying to just, do what other countries have done across the world, to actually, expand their own rights in their own communities. The USSR breaking up, for example, again, a lot of things happened there, but the Baltic states, were really never really thought they were part of that union, and they were actually able to go their own way. That's not a bad thing. They were actually able to, set up their own communities and actually get their own nation states to actually, kind of flourish in a major way compared to the rest of the former USSR. So, or also again, you can go through the Czech and the Czech Republic and Slovakia. They were not working out well, and they split up, peaceably, and there was no problem there. And both those communities are kind of, again, I would say, not supremely flourishing, but they're, able to get out there and actually be part of the world's community. So there's no reason why we have to keep thinking that you have to be part of the system that is not working for the residents in these communities.
Well, and I think. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
I was to say, another reason I look at why this country needs to be broken up is just how divided it is. Right now, with the Democrats in control, they could reach across the aisle to Republicans and say, we want 5G broadband in rural communities, and we want a jobs program where we fix the crumbling bridges and highways that we have. That could get nonpartisan support because you're going to find the senators or the Congress people who, hey, that's really going to help my district. That's going to create money. That's something that could get approval, or at least give the appearance of, hey, we're trying. Democrats are trying to end the filibuster, make Puerto Rico a state, make DC a state, and get rid of the Electoral College. Now, those issues on their own and individually, I'm not saying I'm opposed to them, but what that's saying to Republicans and people who aren't Democrats is Democrats are just trying to solidify their control and their power. They're looking at party over people. And you look at just historically over time, states have lost out to federal government when it comes to power. Congress, for some reason, has ceded their power to the executive branch. These are all things that just are a recipe for disaster. I'm just as scared of liberal fascism as I am probably right fascism. They're both fascism and they're both going to stink. So when you look at it, the Democratic Party is not trying to help Americans, trying to help themselves. And that we can't thrive as a society when the majority party cares more about the party than their actual people.
Well, I think that's a very valid thing. I think, like, one of the things that, I think the point of, like, why I joined the California National Party and, like, the idea of, like, California independence was that there needs to be a reorganization of North America. Well, not North America, just America itself. I should probably say that first. There needs to be a reorganization because it's obvious to me that, again, we have different views, we have different ways of governance, and we can go two directions. We can either break up, try to do our own thing, a la the USSR, or we can decide that, we hate each other so much that we're going to kill each other in droves, a la Yugoslavia. And so, like, we have, again, those two federations had a choice of, like, how to actually deal with this, very distinct beliefs about what was supposed to happen. And one federation decided to go pretty much peacefully, and the other federation decided that their next door neighbors, because they have a different last name, they should be murdered in droves. So I think the whole point of our projects, I should say, is that we should really be focusing on how to peaceably have, like, neighbors and, like, work together in a certain regard, and we should not be continually trying to override each other, because, like, I think at a certain point you just can't do it anymore. Like, when it comes to the South has its own idea how things are supposed to be governed. California has its own distinct ideas, which I think are much better than the South. But at the same time, too, I don't know how much we can keep, trying to, try to use the system as it is to press our own ideas. And also, we don't like in the other direction where, like, they try to press their own ideas on us. So I think, yeah. Sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest issues with centralization in general. And I think, also when we talk about bioregionalism, we talk about, just realizing that, we don't live in the 1800s. A lot of what we're talking about is bringing government up to date. And there have been plenty of movements around the world, whether it's Scotland or Quebec or, dozens of others that have sought their own, self-determination and autonomy. And we live in the future, we have democratic methods and means for deciding decisions. And there's no reason that we need to have the same centralization or level of bureaucracy that we do today. I think another really strong thing to discuss is also when you're talking about a reformation and a restructuring of North America, is also the decolonization of North America. And it's the decolonization of a lot of these kind of neoliberal economic regimes that have directly come from colonization. Since, through the United Nations and really, since World War II, the 20th century has been a century of self, determination and autonomy of really of a lot of, previously colonized areas throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, seeking, autonomy, declaring independence, breaking off from their former, empires. But through that, they've kept the same colonial borders. And that's hugely problematic. And not only have they kept the same colonial borders, but these borders were oftentimes drawn and written through accidents of history or by people in a room somewhere in Europe that had never set foot in these areas. And so a lot of the conflicts that we see play out, a lot of the poverty and, like, wealth disparity globally comes from trying to, basically create nations and nation states where there hasn't been any, like, connection before, and then just trying to mash people together. So with bioregionalism, that's one, as our founding, really principle here in Cascadia, a big discussion is decolonizing the colonial frameworks of the United States, of Canada, and a recognition that the United States, and this was especially prevalent under Trump, when Trump was in charge of the United States, The federal government has the capability to be the largest promoter of white supremacy around the world. It is, in all effect, it becomes a white supremacist organization. And when you look at the history, it is a government and lines drawn on a map that really have done so through hundreds of years of genocide, slavery, cultural erasure. And we need to recognize that moving forward, and then really look at what are the natural boundaries, what are the natural communities of people living here, and how do we remove ourselves from these incredibly harmful systems, and then start together and then build everything back together. And I think that that's, an international human rights framework. And then it's also, it's an argument which we can make, which does cross the aisle. I think Democrat and Republican are American terms. They don't exist in Canada. They don't exist elsewhere. They are products of an American political system that is built out of disenfranchisement, because when you draw these lines, we are now creating political systems that are based on scarcity and a competition over resources, rather than if we were to draw them holistically. If you go back to proposals in the past of drawing states along watershed boundaries or natural borders, where we can be working together in a holistic manner with the whole system in place, you take a lot of that fighting out of it. Because what it comes down to is that people, agree, Americans agree, Canadians agree on probably 95% of things. Like, we want the same thing. We want better lives and more security for our families, for our friends, for our communities. And we might have different needs based on where we live, and we might have different views on how to get there, but we actually agree on a lot. But what we are stuck in is a political system that focuses on the wedge issues and the 3% of the differences that we have, and then hyper focuses on it with a really negative media and spin to create this divisiveness. And I think what's really interesting is that when you talk about decentralization, when you talk about bioregionalism and localism of, like, for example, doesn't matter if you think about if logging is good or bad, we can all agree that pulling our logging from Cambodia in hardwood forests that we don't have any control over, or China, and growing our timber here where we can actually have that debate, is good for people living here. And it's better to be able to protest at the Capitol 100 miles away than 3,000 miles away. So these are all issues that we can kind of agree on and move forward with.
I always say,
understand what you're talking about is that, like, again, like, the valid thing is that the system as is not workable. The system does not really help people. It does not really expand horizons. It does not really, address the needs of the local community. It's just too big. I mean, that was kind of like, again, like, with the American Revolution, there was a big thing about, like, what was it that suspected smugglers would have to go to admiralty courts and stuff like that. The central government in thousands of miles away across the ocean was going to cause, like, or going to call, like, the shots, even though they had no understanding what exactly was going on in America at that time. So that being said, like, we need to have some kind of break, so at least we can kind of, first off, start focusing on, like, our localities, which are not small. Cascadia is not a small community. California definitely is not a small community. And we need to actually be able to address the issues in our own backyard. And our federal system, or again, national system, if we've got the Canadian component, it's too big. It's really, again, it just comes down to that. Like, we have to reorganize and kind of like, segment ourselves away from, like, this kind of, like, current, overlord system where it's just, they don't know what's going on here. And, that's probably the first start of it. It's not even, like, so much about, like, we don't have our values respected in, like, certain capitals. We don't think that, that the system is so representative of us, like, politically wise, ideologically wise. But, like, it comes down to, like, these people don't live here. They don't understand what's going on here. And so we should just kind of move from that point. And then that's the whole thing about, like, having independence is so important. And, independence is, I think, well, first off, like, we use the term secession sometimes, and which is a totally appropriate thing. It is separation, from body politic. But I think in America, it has the connotation of civil war. And also, even the Revolutionary War has a connotation of like warfare. I mean, obviously, because America was not born from a peaceful agreement. America was born from Americans fighting British soldiers to actually die in the battlefield to have that independence. And so like there's always a connotation of violence in both regards, but other countries around the world, they break up when they reorganize and there's no violence. Again, that's such an American phenomenon. We need to get out of that American-centric idea that if we're going to try to change things here, it's going to have to be shooting redcoats or something.
Well, and like the saying, think globally, act locally. With independence movements like ours, environmentally, there's a lot of people, and this is bad in Americans or humans in general. If the problem is happening somewhere else, it doesn't affect us. Like, oh, the water is dirty in Michigan or Ohio. That's not our problem. But when the water is dirty in California, that affects Republicans and Democrats, or that affects everybody. In Gurnerville, California, they're trying to log some beautiful redwoods and Douglas firs from downtown, so they can build, I believe, some upscale residential or like hotels, and like that affects everybody in that area. Because you don't have to be left or right to appreciate the woods, or to appreciate a river. Hippy dippy leftist hikers love the woods, and hardcore red, Republicans love the woods to hunt, or the rivers to fish. When we have that independence movement, and like we are, and if we can become our own nations, you're going to see just drastic improvements in environmental policies, just because it's easier to yell at your state senator than it was to yell at your actual senator. So, the independence movement, and this is a lot we talked about on the communal living one, when you're in a society where people can focus directly on environmental policies like that, things tend to get done. So yeah, that's something I was thinking about. And, with Trump, we were talking about Trump. One of the first things he did was he gave billionaires a tax break by getting rid of the $500,000 mortgage, write-off for taxes, which affected, let's be honest, Washington, Oregon, California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. It affected blue states. They taxed middle class to upper middle class blue state people to fund billionaires everywhere. When the fires happened in California, everyone's shitting on California. We can't handle fires. It's our fault. We're godless. It's because we support gays. He's removed the dome of protection, and now we are being smitten by fire. No, actually, most of the land is owned by the federal government, and Donald Trump didn't want to help California. He wanted to punish us for being liberals because California is the punching bag of the right. It's, it's like when liberals use the term Nazi to describe everyone unjustly, people use California values as if we are so vastly different than the rest of America. One of the things I always tell that drew me to the California National Party, or that America was doomed, was when Marco Rubio in the presidential debate in 2016, so don't worry, California, I brought my own water, and was making a joke about California's drought. It's things like that where the federal government the Democrats are never going to help the blue states, and the Republicans are going to punish us. And it's, our military budget, imagine what our states could do as nations if half of our military spending could be used to, for job programs, for, putting money into education or a universal basic income.
Well, I mean, Bill, you're talking about something again, that's near and dear to my heart, because again, the military budget right now is $750 billion, probably more, I think, at this point. I think it's around $780 billion. Last time I checked is that the military budget is bigger than the next 10 countries' military budgets combined. And only 2 countries out of that next 10 could be considered possible adversaries: Russia, China. The rest is India, Israel, France, Germany, UK, et cetera, Israel. And, again, we have, again, I guess what I'm trying to, sum up here from everything we're talking about is that it's too big. They don't care about local issues. Again, either they ignore us or they hate us. And then in the end, again, we're not seeing forward movement for our people. I mean, the whole point of having a political system in a democratic society is the advancement of the general population, that the general population will live better under this system. It's also kind of implicit with capitalism to a certain extent, that people look around and went, you know what, we're going to try to do this capitalism thing because, again, it will help us, get more resources for our families and things like that, which is, again, in my personal opinion, a horrible lie. But the whole point is that it's supposed to be better. We're not supposed to have all these kind of hardships. But again, right now our system is calcified, stagnant, and also drunk of military spending. The military-industrial complex is a true thing, and I really do believe that we're spending a lot of money on things that are probably already outdated. I wrote an article once for People's World where we're talking about the aircraft carrier. Iran has a military budget which is 1/3 of Elon Musk's net worth. And it looks like they could probably take out some of our carriers from what I understand from military reports. But we're building more carriers not because it's going to make it safer, but because, again, the company that produces those carriers needs that kind of money. So again, we already have outdated things left and right. So again, this whole system is corrupt, stagnant, too large, doesn't pay attention to localities whatsoever, and wants to keep, chugging on it can just continue forever, which is not true because empire after empire has fallen because of overexpansion. And we can go all the way back to Alexander the Greek and the Roman Empire and the British.
Well, I think just as important in all of that is because what you're talking about really is institutionalized corruption. And when you have this kind of pork bill spending, I think that's a perfect example. And it also highlights another really big issue, which I don't think we've touched on, which is just simply the debt. The way that the United States has been spending without, backing up. I think the debt is approaching $30 trillion. Something like $85,000 a citizen, basically. And, more than anything else, that is going to be really what, when our spending and then even just the interest on the debt that we owe, reaches that level, that's part of this neoconservative strategy, which is you inflate the spending so much that you justify cutting all the social programs, and then basically getting government small enough so that you can drown it in the bathtub. So they don't want responsible spending. They don't want a responsible government. They want the bloat and the waste, so that they can justify basically destroying the things. And I actively believe that we do have there are members of political parties and members of the government that actively want to dismantle the government, dismantle those services. And so I think things like that debt make one of the most persuasive cases for independence so that we can have control over our own money. I think California is similar in Cascadia, that you're a giver state. You pay more money to the federal government than you get back. And I think that's a huge thing of if we had control over our own budget. And there's so many things that we could do in terms of fiscal transparency, accountability, instituting things like, letting people actually see where their tax dollars goes, getting a receipt for where, for their tax money each year. There's just so much there that we could really do. But I even think that one of the, at some point, one of the paths to independence might simply be buying our way out, buying our share of debt, and discussing what that looks like, after the government becomes a failed state.
That's something that I've had that conversation with people too. Eventually, just hey, we'll pay our debt and 10% of yours, and we want out. And that would be a hard argument for red states to be against. And that
Well,
money up
especially
front
when they're
sucks,
pressed, when they're really
but
pressed.
you pay it back. You win it back over time. The other thing I try to tell people too, when it comes to like social issues, if Cascadia and California leave, all of a sudden Europe doesn't have to trade with the rest of America. China, Japan, they don't have to trade with the rest of America. So, Alabama and Texas, or you have some like really bigoted laws, all of a sudden France can boycott, trading with you and still get California money or Cascadia money, which is still 20. What I think if you combine both of our economies, it's like a third of the nation's economy is on the West Coast, something like that. It puts economic pressure on a lot of red states and a lot of purple states to get their stuff together.
And actually, that's kind of a valid point, because sometimes when you talk about independence of like Cascadia or California, people think like, oh, you're going to abandon the rest of the citizens out there, like you're not going to fight for their rights. You don't want to keep this together because again, it's too tough, and like you're not going to actually like go with them and like make sure there's like proper voting laws in Georgia and stuff like that. Actually, I think again, independence of California and Cascadia would actually be much more leverage against the rest of the United States, just like you said, because again, like with these trade issues, all of a sudden there's a boycott for this like rump United States, this leftover USA. That's more leverage to get things done properly, and especially when we work in a capitalist system like this. We're talking about like debt and things like that too. It should be mentioned that most empires pretty much ran out of money in the end, and our empire is as well. America's kind of chugging along, but again, like it's extreme. The last time we had this kind of like debt profile, I think, was the Second World War, and the only reason why we kind of like steamed right through that was because the big hidden history of the American economy in the last 20th century was that when you have all your allies and competitors completely destroyed economically, yeah, you're going to do fantastic. Because America was never, besides like Hawaii, was never really, bombed out or shelled out or anything like that. But the rest of Europe was completely that case. Britain was bombed to pieces by, by the Blitz. France, Western Europe, Eastern Europe was occupied by the Nazis, destroyed. Soviet Union was not really already, first off, their system wasn't even connected to the world system. Second off, they had, no way to export anything because, again, they lost like 20 million citizens in the war. So, and Japan was, obliterated by us, by napalm and nuclear bombing. So, when you have the whole playing field is wiped out, like, yeah, America was chug along just, fantastic. And that's why we can kind of run up that debt and not have a problem in really the end. But now we're just, pretending that we can just keep going and just keep running the credit card. And we're just going to end up like the Brits or the Soviets. The British Empire would span 1/4 of the globe. And they just couldn't afford it anymore. That was basically the whole, it wasn't, there was movements and things like that and pressure. But really it was that, like, the Nazis took out so much of their money supply that they could not, maintain forces in India. And they couldn't maintain forces in, like, Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe, and, like, South Africa, like, going to the general list, Singapore. The last thing they could maintain for a while until 97 was, like, Hong Kong. But I think that was just because they were just stubborn. There was no reason why they could maintain it whatsoever. So, long story short, we're on that trajectory. That this is the fall of empires is the lack of money, and we're heading towards that. And again, we should just be preparing for the future. Just like climate change is something we have to prepare for. We should be preparing for that. This government is not going to be able to operate, and I think Americans really do think that, with all its foibles and problems, the American government will just keep chugging along like it always is. Like, again, like somehow there's an exceptionalism there.
All right, so we'll leave with a final thought. I'll ask both you guys. Brandon, what do you see as the ideal situation in existence between an independent Cascadia and an independent California? How do you see our relationship working out, and maybe the Cascadia relationship to America?
great question. And I think, ultimately that will be a question that will be answered by the people living here. And so in my own mind, I would see it as two very close allied independence movements, basically working together, California and Cascadia, to remove ourselves at the same time, which would be done through a referendum and a vote. And then, also working out with other parts of the country that would have to work out their own relationship and decide if they still wanted to remain a part of it or not. I think it's very interesting that, we can talk about the fact that California and Cascadia control all of the entry and exit points, to Asia, along the West Coast, and all of the deep water ports and all of these other things. But I do find it interesting that right now, 50% of Republicans want their state to break off in the South. And so I think at some point we agree with them and we say, oh, all right, we're going to let you do your thing. You let us do our thing. And then I would hope that, here in Cascadia, that upon independence, or exploring the idea that there would be some type of constituent assembly of experts and citizens who would get together, learn from the best that the world has to offer, learn from examples here at home that are inspiring, and really explore what a 21st century democracy could be, that's rooted in human rights, sustainability, bioregionalism, and really righting the wrongs of the past as we move forward into something much better for everybody living here.
What about you, Forbes?
Well, I think, in my mind, as a realistic prospect, is that I think, again, the empire cannot maintain. So again, there will be movements to actually have, independence up and down the West Coast, California and Cascadia. I think when it comes to this, it would probably be predicated on some kind of Republican resurgence by the Electoral College. Because again, we can't do away with Electoral College under the system right now, because again, Republican senators and the Congress is not going to vote against it. So we're going to have
an amendment, and those states are not going to pass it.
They're not going to do it because they would give up too much power. So there's no way in hell that's going to happen. So, but that doesn't matter. I mean, people are focused on constitutionality and don't understand that real politics does happen where certain empires and countries can't put their own will against a population that is breaking off. We're already seeing that in multiple cases throughout history. Yugoslavia, USSR, the Czechoslovakia. Also, again, just in recent memory right now, not too long ago, Brexit was kind of a limited secession. That was the European Union, and granted, was not, considered a country per se, but the UK basically break off from that bloc. So I think we're going to see something where we could possibly have a vote where Californians go we're done with this. The U.S. government won't recognize it for multiple reasons, and it wouldn't be a civil war per se, but it would be something where we'd probably be considered some kind of, for a while, and recognize, rogue state that actually is breaking off. But then the U.S. government, so weakened because of years of incompetence and mismanagement, and the constant warfare that they had to keep paying for, did not do anything about it. And then finally, after a while, we have some kind of quiet peace agreement between ourselves and the rest of the country. And we get that through, and then we can reorganize and actually try to focus on real issues, not how to maintain pipelines in Afghanistan, or how to pressure Venezuela and Nicaragua into submission, or how to the grand chess game of the Middle East. We're not doing anything like that anymore. So the empire is just going to probably shrink again. There'll probably be a USA afterwards, but be some kind of remnant of its former self, which is again true to history for a lot of empires. And we'll just have to sit down and reorganize what we really want, which is actually going to be a great moment, because we can clear the playing board. We can actually have a moment where we can say do we want this, or do we not want that? Do we want this? Again, is housing a right? Is freedom of speech what does that exactly mean? Like, again, like, does it mean like in the workplace? I mean, like all these kind of like, a chance for change that we will not have if we're under the system as it is. The system as is, whatever you want to say about good, bad, or whatever, it's stagnant and it will not change. So again, like we have a chance to actually change, and maybe we'll make mistakes, maybe we'll make bad moves or something like that. But at least we're not going to be just sitting down here for like the next like 20 years, talking about like, well, can black people vote? Should we have unions? It's like that kind of the bullshit back and forth we've been doing forever now.
I see the relationship of an independent Cascadian California as follows: an open border, first of all. I don't see massive. I don't think we'll need to build a wall. A lot of the things Brandon said, leaving at the same time would be great. I see us working together on a high-speed railway system that goes through the top of Cascadia all the way down to San Diego. I see mutual defense agreements. If one state is attacked, the other, or a nation is attacked, the other nation protects. I think something that I would love to see with Cascadian California is, because the border where we are is so sparsely populated, I would love it to be either like 50 miles each side or 25 miles, whatever, X amount of miles, where if a person in Cascadia lives in a rural area, but there's a hospital in California that's 10 miles away, I would want, or a university that's in Oregon that's close, where someone in California doesn't live near a college. I would love to see some kind of border thing where not a dual citizenship, but access to like emergency healthcare, or higher education. Something, just because there is a region in California to Oregon where there's just not a lot of population, where we could save money. And even along the lines of, we talk about fire, when there's a fire that happens in Oregon or in California, like just both countries working together to fix those problems. So,
well, I mean, Bill, can I interject for a second? Wouldn't we basically want to have like something like what the ideal? I'm not talking about the reality, but the ideal of the European Union, where you can actually go across borders. We're all part of the same thing too. We have some mutual defense, mutual economic agreements. That would be my perfect vision for Cascadian California, because again, we have the whole West Coast. So again, like, if that was actually together, like we'd actually be able to, actually have people go across, not a big deal, like, it's like crossing state to state as of now, and like some agreements and stuff like that. But again, also like, again, I'm not talking about the reality of the EU, but like the dream of the EU, where like, again, like we'd actually could have independence to really kind of like, bring forth like what we want to do in every country.
All right, so that was a long time to talk about independence. I think we got a lot done. Forbes, I'm going to change the table with a California product of the week, and I'm actually going to promote a franchise that started in Seattle I had for lunch today, called Teriyaki Madness. It is the Chipotle of Japanese food. It's glorious. I had tofu and chicken teriyaki with double vegetables. It was great. The food is fresh like Chipotle. It's like that step up from fast food that like everybody in my house loves. Teriyaki Madness, from me to my kids. It's such a cool, like fast food doesn't have to be bad food. And
No,
like this is all
yeah.
fresh to order.
Yeah.
It's a very cool company. And I don't know if they've reached down to you yet, Forbes, but
I'm not hitting Madness, no.
We've got Teriyaki Madness where I am, and they're kind of like Dutch Brothers. They're just kind of expanding southward. So it's one of those cool Cascadia franchises that get it while it still tastes good, and it's still as awesome as it is. So Teriyaki Madness, Cascadia, get a thumbs
that
up.
sounds pretty good. If I was going to get some Teriyaki Madness, I'd probably put a little sriracha sauce from Boy Fung Foods. Boy Fung Foods is the one that really kind of like generalized sriracha sauce throughout the entire country, and it's made in Irwindale, California. And again, like that's a very interesting story. The guy who founded it was a Vietnamese refugee, and again, like sriracha sauce, that you probably have it from his brand. It's got the green cap and it's got the rooster on the label, and sriracha goes good with everything, pretty much everything. Pizza,
Asian food, you name it.
sandwiches, whatever, it is ridiculous. And that is a California product. So that's, again, one of the things I think California should be very proud of, because, again, there's no place where, you don't hear at least once, do you have sriracha? And they're talking about Hoi Fung foods.
Wonderful. I don't think I can beat that. I think a perfect example of the blending of Cascadian and California culture.
Absolutely. So for more information about the California National Party on Twitter, at vote_CNP, California National.Party. Forbes, what's last exit on the left on Medium? That's where they can find you. And Brandon, Cascadia Underground. What's the official? Should they Google Cascadia Underground, or is the website easier just to?
We'll throw out 3 different websites. I would say that anybody interested in the political party aspect of things should go to the CascadiaBioregionalParty.com. I would say that anybody interested in learning more about bioregionalism or the cultural aspect should go to CascadiaBioregion.org. It's the Department of Bioregion. And then anybody interested in the more media side of things, articles, learning more about our media center, should do CascadiaUnderground.com.
Excellent. All right. So good talk, you guys, and see you next week.
See you next week. You guys take care. Have a good Easter Sunday.